What are some of your earliest memories from childhood?
First memory from school, from home.
What kind of family were you from? Do you remember any memories with your family?
Well, look, my family was, we lived in Matagalpa, in a city, it's in the northern part of the country. And my family was a middle-class family.
A middle-class family.
We'll say with relatively comfortable social position. And it was a family, a small family.
Very small family.
Just my father, my mother, my older brother, and I.
My father, my older brother, and myself.
My mom worked sewing for dressmakers. She was a seamstress.
Sewing.
And my father worked in business.
And my father worked in commerce.
So we basically grew up with better conditions than the vast majority of boys and girls, undoubtedly.
Social condition than most.
Because we had stable nourishment, education, healthcare.
We had a good education and health.
I think that my father and mother were people who had an enormous capacity for teaching their children, forming their values.
Of education and forming of their children.
They were very committed, right, to the development of each one of us. Not just the development in the educational sense, but the development of personalities. It was very comprehensive. Then this was, I would say, at least I feel that my childhood was a very peaceful childhood, and with an education, two types of education, right? First, the Christian education, which came from my mother, and a more political education from my father. My father was a man with a more liberal way of thinking, very different from what was the norm in our city. And he was anti-clerical, he was anti-Yankee, and he had also, he had admired Sandino. He had a more political perspective of life, and they both had, I think, a strong social commitment with the community. So this is what our childhood was like. We studied in private schools, maybe the best schools in the city. A type of education that at the time, the schools were not mixed. These schools were girls' schools or boys' schools, and they were religious schools. So my brother and I completed school in these religious schools.
Looking back, are there any events that stood out to you that led you to become politically active?
Pensando en algunos eventos que te motivaron a tener una vida más política.
Events? No. No, I don't think specific events like that. I think that it was the educational process in some way made us commit to what was happening in Nicaragua. but not a specific circumstance. There wasn't a trigger that, well, one day you found yourself with something and you say, well, now I'm going to do something. No, I don't remember. No, we did participate in the mobilizations of secondary school students in the 70s. There was a huge participation of secondary school students in a mobilization about the issue of political prisoners. Also to support teachers and healthcare workers in demands that were made during the strikes. The secondary school movement was probably the strongest movement that there was in Nicaragua. And I was directly involved in this mobilization. We'll say, compared to what had happened in other periods when the student movement was practically non-existent. So that when I arrived at the university, I had already been through a certain level of political participation while in secondary school.
What did you study in university?
I started to study medicine. I studied 3 years at the university in the city of León, and then I went underground. I never went back to finish my degree in medicine. Then at the University of León, there was a lot of, there was a lot of political movement at the time. I entered the university in the year following the earthquake, the year immediately following the earthquake, and there was a lot of vibrancy at the university, politically and social. And I joined the university student movement during my first year. Then I came into contact with people from the FSLN, and I joined the FSLN. And I went underground around the beginning of '76.
Can you talk a little bit about your experience being underground?
Well, there are two types of experience there. One is in the mountains, which is an experience that is much more of a collective experience. This is about an armed group. It doesn't matter if it's big or small, but it's a group that moves throughout the mountains. And there, the principal challenge is with respect to the environment. It's a tough life. You have to carry. The backpack is heavy. It was, I think, almost 50 pounds. Plus the 10 pounds counting the rifle. And I used to weigh 100 pounds, right? So that's heavy. It's heavy. You have to walk a lot. We would walk 8, 10, 12 hours a day. We would walk 2 to 3 days to go to combat, and then we returned another 2 to 3 days to get back to central camp. And it's a life that is really reduced to survival.
A life that was basically revolving around survival.
Were there many other women doing what you were doing then?
Yes, there were other women. There were like 3 or 4 more women, 3 more women.
And how many were in your group total?
In that column, those 3 women. What happened is that at the end, I was the only one who stayed in combat in that group. because one of them got pregnant, another of them got sick. One of them, she was a campesina, and she was very good, and she was very young, and she had to go down to Honduras. So then I stayed with the group.
And how old were you at this time?
22, 21. 21 years old. Yeah, and the mountain is a very difficult one. I mean, it's a hard life, but there's another part to it. The fact that you're in a group, right?
And how many men were in this group?
Well, at different times, right? At one time, there were almost 40 men or 30-something. At others, we were 20 total. At others, we were about 15. So it changed. But the mountain life is very hard. It's probably a very difficult experience. The city has fewer physical demands, but the stress is much higher. You know, because you have to be a lot more disguised. We only went out at night, and during part of the time, in another period of time, we would go out during the day, but it was very dangerous. You're harassed all the time by the enemy. Somoza's guard had a lot of posts and had a lot of control during some time over the streets and over the highways. And the more we moved, the more possibilities that they would locate us. So then that was a period of very elevated stress. You know, when you were underground in the city, you had a very short life expectancy. I don't know. Some people lasted 4 months, 5 months, but nobody lasted years in the city.
And what position did you hold at this time?
In the city? Mm-hmm. Well, different ones. I was in an ideology formation commission. I was in a group to organize women's organizations and student organizations. Later, I was at the front of the Granada front. Later, I was at the León front, and then I stayed there in León during the final insurrection as a political military chief of the Western Front.
You were one of few female commanders. How did you rise to such a high post?
Well, I don't really know, because I think it had to do with me. I had to live through different circumstances. I had the experience in the mountains. I had the experience in the city. I had been trained over several months in Cuba. And this allowed me to also have more or less of a good performance in the city as well as the mountains. And I had the capacity to organize and some leadership skills, so I think that helped, right?
You've been described elsewhere as an extraordinary female fighter, yet you weren't promoted to the National Directorate. Will you permit me to ask why?
Tú te caracteriza como una mujer luchadora extraordinaria, pero no te promovieron a la directiva nacional. Y si me permite decir por qué.
Well, the National Directorate during the time of the revolution was made up of 9 people.
The National Directorate during that time was managed by 9 people.
You know, which was naturally as a result of the of an agreement between the three factions of the FSLN. Each faction had contributed 3 people to the directorate,
Each aspect put forth three people for the directorate.
and it was a group of 9.
A group of 9 people.
The tendency was that this group would remain the same,
The same.
that it didn't get bigger, not with more men or more women for a long time, because any enlargement changed the correlations of initial forces within this collective. Later, when the directorate was open to expansion, there were various problems. One issue, I think, evidently had to do with machismo. And on the other side, I haven't been an easy person. You know, I've shown, well, let's say, a very defiant political behavior. And I think that contributed to a group within the directorate that kept me from entering into the directorate, and also a group outside of the directorate.
And someone that was outside of the directorate.
You know, that's the reason. But well, the FSLN was a structure that also was under an important machismo influence. You know, a lot. I think that the revolution allowed all of the topics that had to do with women, with gender equality, to take off, but the FSLN remained a vertical organization,
Kind of concentrate itself as a vertical organization,
not a democratic organization. So this simply changed the possibilities of mobility.
Yet you played a very important role in some very historic battles, like the fall of the National Palace. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Jugó un papel muy importante en algunas batallas importantes, por ejemplo, como la toma de la Asamblea Nacional. Si puedes compartir un poco sobre eso.
Well, I participated in the palace assault basically through being in charge of the political negotiations. The group in command included the chief of the operation, someone in charge of the military area, and I was responsible for the negotiations. I was 22 years old. You know, an operation like this one of the palace is a difficult one. But I think the design had been successful. And later, the process of staying in the palace was difficult. But it was a spectacular action done with very few resources. I was the only woman in this operation. I had that peculiarity, right, of seeing to very complex situations. And this attack on the palace allowed the struggle for Sandinismo to launch to a global level. So this was basically a successful operation as well. It placed those who led the takeover of the palace in a very highly publicized position. It was a difficult operation. It gives you the feeling that you can be successful, or you can die. There isn't a middle option. So this was the main difficulty of it. There's no third outcome. That's to say, you come out of it very well or you don't come out of it. And this isn't an easy experience either. But well, like I told you, I had a certain training. The majority of the command were very young men who also had much less training. And basically what was required was just a lot of willpower.
And after such an intense and difficult period, what was your transition like to civil society after the war?
Well, look, it has two sides, right? There's a part that's, very happy because you can return to your family, right? You can go back to life, in a way. But then you realize that there are also other things. Normal life has changed. Normal, when I say, I mean daily life, it has changed. The years that have passed by have created a distance between you and your friends. And in many cases, there were people that I didn't even know where they ended up, where they were. I hadn't followed up on them. And on the other side, there's a part that is difficult, right? Because in the end, you're a survivor. And every survivor carries the weight of the dead. You carry the weight of your own memories, of your own life, of your own survival. And this is a very difficult aspect that now, it's studied a lot more. Now it even has a name. It's post-traumatic stress disorder. But at that time, it didn't have a name. So then you got depressed, you dream, or you have nightmares, and you miss your comrades who died, or you believe that you don't deserve life. Or one, you believe that you don't deserve to be alive, and many people aren't able to come out of that. Many people become alcoholics. Many people enter into a process of self-destruction. It's a very difficult time.
And for you, what was it like for you?
Very, very, very difficult. It was a very difficult process. Very difficult. I had to confront those topics and manage to overcome them little by little. You're never able to really get over them, but you learn to get by. The complexity of the life that you have, of the life that you've had. So then this allowed me to continue my life without a self-destructive process, but it's not easy. It's not easy. And then there's a happy part, right? That's to say you're able to get things back. For me, for example, I was able to get the ocean back. I had forgotten that I liked to go to the ocean. Or certain foods, or certain habits. But there are things that I think that stay lost. And then there's a part of the emotional you that hasn't matured, because it's like there's a valley separating you between those who matured in their emotional relationships, and you didn't mature because you were seeing to other things.
And what were you doing for work after the war?
Well, I stayed in the Army.
I stayed in the military.
I stayed as the chief of the Chinandega and Leon military region. And this wasn't hard for me because it had to do with what I was doing before. But later I was transferred to Managua, to the Organization of Political and Social Work. So that was something not so new, but in a different magnitude. But it was a period that I really enjoyed, because I got to go to a lot of the factories. I had lunch with the workers. I talked a lot with the people. I was doing a lot of community organizing and social organizing, and it was a very nice period. Yeah, very nice. At least for me, it was a very nice period. Later, and this will also give you, but this also continues to give you new challenges, right? I had to organize unions, organize community committees, manage women, the guilds. It was a very broad assignment, but a very nice assignment. And later they appointed me to the Ministry of Health. So then there I had another kind of challenge, because, well, this was something else. It's something a little bit more intricate. The Ministry of Health is difficult. It's complex work. You have to manage and administer a lot of resources. You work a lot with people, and part of the time, or actually the whole time that I was at the Ministry of Health, we were already under a war situation that was getting worse and worse in Nicaragua. So this made it really difficult. But it was also a period that I really enjoyed. I was still very young, right? I don't know, 30 years old. Yeah, I was extremely young. But at least I didn't make a ton of mistakes, I'd say. I think.
And how did you decide to leave that post at the Ministry of Health?
Well, I left when we lost the elections in '90. And I went to the National Assembly. I was a deputy between 1990 and 1996.
And what issues did you work on when you were part of the Assembly?
Well, different things. For a time, I was the second leader of our party, and later I was the leader of a party. I had to direct our parliamentary group. And later, for me in particular, I really liked the work on reforming the Constitution.
And is that an elected position?
Yeah, yes, it's an elected position. Yeah, it's parliament, right?
And how long did you stay in that position?
6 years, 7 years, 7 years.
And then your term ended.
The term ended in 1996. Yeah, the term ended in 96.
And then what did you do after that?
Well, after that, I'd already began to study history, so I completed a history degree. And I began to work as a consultant, also in history, right? Giving classes, conducting historical research. Basically, that's what I've done in that period. And it's a very nice job, too, because I've worked a lot as a public policy consultant in civil society, not in the government. So then it's a different experience, but it's a very nice experience too.
At this time, did you return to get another degree from the university?
Well, I finished history, a master's in history. Yeah, no. Medicine, no. I never went back to medical school.
Were you also working on social issues at the time?
Yes, more accurately, political. Political in the Sandinista Renovation Movement, which was a party that we founded in '95.
What was your role in that?
Well, my first role was co-founder of the party, vice president of the party, and later president of the party for 10 years.
I was there 10 years.
And I stopped being president of the party in 2007.
I left my position as como vice-president, as vice president.
No, como presidenta del partido,
as president
hasta el 2007.
Party of the Sandinista Renovation Movement in 2007.
What was the focus of the Sandinista Renovation Movement? Why was that movement necessary?
The focus of SRM was basically a democratic Sandinista party with democratic commitment. And it's born out of a division within the Sandinista front, because the FSLN was, one could already see the access and the strict rule of Daniel Ortega coming.
Domination by Ortega.
Let's say that, there were three big problems in the FSLN at that time. First, a definition of the platforms for the times that we were living, and we began to live in the 90s, right? Second, the democratization of the party, and third, the fighting strategies. And there was a big debate for all three of these topics. A group of us had an idea about each one of these three aspects. And another sector, led by Daniel Ortega, had another different idea. And a time came when the differences became irreconcilable. So then we left the FSLN and we founded the SRM. This was the point, and we've continued. We've continued developing the party all of these years. It's now 16 years old. Mm-hmm.
And in 2005, when you left your official position there, did you stay politically active?
Yeah. Yes.
And what kind of issues were you addressing?
Well, I'm still a member of the directorate and of the party's executive board. So then I'm politically active, even though I don't have space. I don't have a seat in parliament, but I am politically active in the party, right?
After the electoral defeat, a lot of people switched their focus from what were traditionally Sandinista missions and stopped being politically active. but you didn't.
missions and
Why do you
stuff
think you
put
stayed
more
involved?
active, but you didn't. Why do you think you stayed involved?
Después de la pérdida de las elecciones en el año 90, mucha gente cambió su enfoque y dejaron de ser un trabajo tan político, pero tú no cambiaste, ¿por qué no?
No sé,
I don't know.
I don't know.
no sé por qué no.
I don't know why I didn't.
Tal vez debía haberlo hecho,
Maybe I should have.
Maybe I should
pero no sé.
But I don't know. Well, in the first place, I think that because
Yo sentía que
I
teníamos
felt
que
like we had
lograr
to
organizar un
be able to
sandinismo,
organize a Sandinismo,
un partido sandinista
a Sandinista party that had a clear democratic platform of social justice.
Es decir, que
That's to say that
presentar
we had
una
to
otra
present
oferta
another Sandinista option to the country.
y que eso es
And well, this,
esencial para
it was essential,
para el sandinismo
you know,
y para
for Sandinismo and for Nicaragua.
y creo que
And I think
eso
that
me
this
mantuvo
kept me
entretenida
engaged this whole time.
kept me busy during all that time.
pero bueno, ahora el partido
But
tiene
well,
relevos,
now the party has a relief system. It has new leaders. It has young people.
digamos, unos líderes jóvenes
We'll say some very good young leaders, women and men, right? And it has a much broader base,
More broad,
an important base. I think an important role in the country.
that it plays in this country.
Entonces creo
So
que todo
I
el
think
tiempo
that this whole time that I stayed involved in politics for this, the party's politics.
Maintain my political work because I was doing political work within the party.
creo que no
I don't think
voy a dejar de ser político
I'll stop
I don't think I'll ever stop
being political
porque yo creo que
because
hay que
I think that
opinar.
we have to form our opinions.
Lo que no
What
estoy segura
what
es
I'm
si voy a
not
seguir
sure
haciendo
of
política
is if I'll continue doing politics in a partisan way or if I'll do it through another
I'm not sure
medium.
about is if I'm going to continue being political through a certain party or through some other means.
This is the uncertainty more accurately.
You are known for being very well spoken and passionate about the issues that interest you. And I wonder if you can recall in recent years some of the direct actions you've taken that others might consider more radical.
Mucha gente te conoce como una persona con mucha pasión sobre las cosas que te interesan. Quiero saber si puedes comentar sobre algunas acciones que has tomado que algunas personas tal vez lo llaman como radical. ¿Entiendes?
No.
You're known for being very outspoken about issues that you're passionate about. But I wonder if you can also recall some of the actions you've taken in recent years that others might consider more radical.
Bueno, que ha sido una persona que es muy como vocal sobre ciertos temas, pero también has hecho cosas que algunas personas lo podrían llamar como radicales. Si puedes comentar un poco de eso.
For example, some people have been outspoken against Ortega.
Algunas personas han sido muy como vocal y muy frente sobre sus experiencias o sus pensamientos sobre Ortega.
But
You've taken some examples that have gone a bit
Pero tú
further,
has tomado algunos ejemplos que van tal vez más allá.
maybe more creative.
Por ejemplo,
For example?
I've read that in 2008 you went on a hunger strike.
He leído en 2008 que participaste en una huelga de hambre.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about why you decided to do that?
¿Puedes contarnos un poco de por qué decidiste
bueno,
participar en eso?
Well, because we didn't have any other way to protest.
To protest.
They were taking away the legal personality from the party, and we didn't have another way to protest besides that.
entonces
So then
que decidí la huelga.
that was how I decided on the hunger strike.
Una manera de llamar la atención, pues, de lo que
A
estaba
way to
pasando
call
en el
attention to what was happening in the country, to what was starting to happen, seriously happen in the country. Yeah.
Pero bueno,
But
es
well,
cierto
it's
que-
true that
que
that that I can be radical, and it's good. That's a good thing.
Being radical is good. It's a good thing.
More accurately, sometimes I worry about not being radical enough. Well, I believe the following. I mean, in my way of being, one has to call things by their name.
People have to put things in the name when they
It doesn't matter how harsh it is.
how difficult it may be.
Now, obviously, in a society like that of Nicaragua,
Societies such as Nicaragua
speaking against the government has a price.
comes at a cost.
Yeah, it comes with a price. A journalist, his opposition to the government in the current situation will pay a price, or the newspaper, or a media outlet,
Pay a price right now.
or any person who has a contentious role vis-a-vis the government will pay a price. And I pay that price.
What are some of the consequences?
What are some of the consequences you've experienced for being outspoken?
It's difficult to, well, for example, I haven't been able to get some consulting work
I failed to receive some type of work.
because, well, people don't always take such risks. And the non-governmental organizations do take those risks, but in other kinds of places they don't. So then the sources of work are evidently reduced. I can't work on anything that has to do with the government, right? I can't even go and give a lecture at the University of León because they ordered me stoned and they would stone me and close the university. I mean, there are a lot of things, right?
What about universities in the
What
United
about
States?
universities in the United States?
Well, until recently, I didn't have a visa to enter the United States.
Why?
Well, because the Bush administration classified me as a terrorist, and they took away my visa, and I just received another visa just a month ago. Because I had been conceptualized as a terrorist according to the PATRIOT Act, Article 212, subsection A, B, etc. So then, well, I haven't been to the United States in a long time. I'd been granted a teaching position, the Robert Kennedy position at Harvard, and I couldn't go because of this.
Can you tell me a little bit about the issues you're working on now? What are you most passionate about now?
Well, now for me, one of the most important topics is that there be transparent elections in Nicaragua this year.
My focus right now is that there are more transparent elections right now.
There is a high risk for electoral fraud.
In these elections,
If there is electoral fraud, the political situation in the country is going to deteriorate a lot more. And I think that this government has restricted political rights, and that it also hasn't taken the country in the direction to substantially reduce poverty. But I'm in a stage of transition. in which I have to decide
cómo quiero hacer
how
lo que
I
siempre
want to
quiero
do
hacer.
what I always want to do, right?
Siempre quiero hacer política.
I always want to do
Ahora es
politics,
cómo
but
quiero
now
hacer
it's
política.
how do I want to do politics?
Digamos, en mi
So
transición, cómo quiero
that's
usar
my
mi tiempo.
transition. How do I want to use my time?
I'm in this transition right now.
I know that your current position right now is as a professor here at the university. Do you see a link between scholarship and
Sé
activism?
que tu papel o tu trabajo que tienes ahora es en esta universidad. Quiero saber si ves una conexión entre la academia y el feminismo y activismo.
Mira, yo, en realidad, yo
Well,
trabajo
in
como
reality,
docente.
I don't teach. I'm not faculty at the university. I don't work as a professor. But I work on a project between the Institute of History and Flaxo, the Latin American School of Social Sciences.
Y se trata de dos
And
portales
it
web.
works with two websites.
Uno se llama
One
Enlace
is called
Académico
the
Centroamericano,
Central American Academic Network,
y el otro se llama
and the other is called Central American Memory.
Ambos, es
Both,
decir, Enlace tiene que
that's
ver con
the network has to do with creating a space for the development of social sciences in Central America.
A space for the development of the social sciences in Latin America.
y Memoria Centroamericana tiene
And
que ver con
Central American Memory is a project that has to do with creating an internet space
que permita a la gente
that
acceder al
allows
patrimonio
people to
histórico y
access
cultural
digitalized Central American cultural and historical heritage.
Patrimony of the country.
Yo trabajo muy
It's a
bonito.
very nice job.
Very trustworthy.
I really like it a lot.
You teach about these issues too.
Enseñas también sobre eso.
Muy de repente,
Every
o
once
muy
in
de
a
repente
while,
hoy,
let's see, not so once in a while. I teach specific classes, and the majority of them
al líder
are
de jóvenes,
to young leaders.
To young leaders.
líderes de partidos
Leaders
políticos,
of
líderes de
political
organizaciones
parties,
sociales.
leaders of social or religious organizations.
Esta semana
This week I
tengo
have
unos
one
días.
on Friday. Friday and Saturday I have a group.
Saturday.
Sí,
Yeah,
es una experiencia muy bonita.
it's a really nice experience.
Do you have academic freedom? Can you speak freely when you're working with the students?
Hablar libremente son los
Sí.
estudiantes.
Yeah, yes. I mean, those who don't want to hear me, they don't hire me.
Well, outside of the work here, do you see an overlap or a role for scholarship and activist work?
Y aparte de, como fuera de la universidad, de ese trabajo, ves un espacio para la combinación de la académica con el activismo.
Aquí es difícil.
Here it's difficult to say.
Tendría que hacer investigación, pues. en
It would
todo
have to
caso.
be research in any case. And yes, at times I have done research that has to do with the political area,
Pero no es tan sencillo.
but it's not as easy.
Porque la
Because,
democracia y el activismo
like I
político en
told you,
Nicaragua
political activism in Nicaragua,
tiene un
it comes with a price.
Sí, el país es un
The
país muy
country is
polarizado.
very politically polarized.
Entonces,
So
mucho de los trabajos,
a lot of the
de las
work,
actividades está
the activities,
muy permeado.
it's
Es
just
un
very
lugar muy bueno
tough.
para
It's a very
para
good place
trabajar
to
en el
work.
instituto.
Very good place to work is at the
Es un
institute.
instituto de historia.
It's a history
La historia
institute.
en sí misma es
History in itself
implica un
is
posicionamiento
explains a political position.
político, un posicionamiento en general. frente a la vida, frente
A
a la
general
sociedad.
position for life, for society.
Entonces, esto es un
I mean,
espacio
so this is a good place, but there aren't that many outlets
en ese sentido, ¿no?
in that sense.
Do you have relationships with other activists in your country that you work with?
Alianzas con otros activistas en el país.
¿En qué sentido?
In what sense?
That you support or maybe they support you?
Sí, sí, sí.
Yeah. Yes. But there is.
El primer colectivo, el colectivo de partidos.
We'll say
indudablemente.
there's a first group is undoubtedly the collective of the party. And then there's
conjunto de líderes
There's the
sociales
group of social leaders
The other is a group of social leaders
that works more or less on similar topics, right? Democracy, public policy,
transparencia,
transparency, fighting against corruption,
en los medios de comunicación, fuera de ellos, en las
in the
organizaciones
media or
sociales.
outside of it, in social organizations.
different social organizations.
And what about activists from
Well,
other
what about
countries? Do you
activists from other
experience any
countries?
solidarity?
Do you experience any solidarity?
Activistas de otros países, hay solidaridad.
Nosotros tenemos contacto
We
con-
have contact
con
with
grupos fuera,
outside groups.
algunos nicaragüenses, otros
Some in Nicaragua, other foreign groups.
básicamente
Basically around certain topics and on occasion around issues of the party, right?
Themes and also about dealing with the party.
pero bueno, hay un vínculo del movimiento
But,
Mujeres
well,
Nicaragua,
there's
un
a
parte
very
del
strong
movimiento,
link
una
with
parte
the
de
women's movement in Nicaragua, with women's movements in other places,
y sectores
and
políticos y del
political
movimiento social
sectors
en
and
Europa,
social movements in Europe that have a relationship with us,
y no
and
necesariamente
not
con el
necessarily with the FSLN,
Frente, o en América Latina también.
and in Latin America too.
Speaking about international issues, I'm interested in your opinion about neoliberal policies in this context of globalization, and if you think it has a unique impact on issues in Nicaragua.
Hablando de cuestiones internacionales, a mí me interesa mucho el tema del neoliberalismo y en términos que con la globalización y si tiene algún impacto aquí en Nicaragua específicamente.
¿Qué parte?
What part?
In what way?
I wonder if you have an opinion about the way economic policies that would fit under neoliberalism are affecting any social issues here.
Quiero saber si alguna de esas políticas económicas afectan al país.
Sí,
Las
Yes.
cuestiones sociales aquí en el país.
sí, desde el año 90.
Yeah.
fecha.
From 1990 to now, economic policy has been
Dentro de la
within
órbita
the
política del
realm
Fondo
of
Monetario
the
Internacional.
policies of the International Monetary Fund and of the World Bank.
Una oleada de privatizaciones
There was a wave of privatizations
Privatizations,
y una
and
política
economic
económica que
policies
privilegia
that
fiscales
privileges
y
economic
monetario.
stability and monetary stability.
Privilegia lo fiscal y lo
It,
monetario.
it privileges the fiscal and monetary policies.
Y
And
obviamente,
obviously,
toda la parte social
the
se-
whole
se vio
social
afectada.
part was affected, right?
En la política social hubo
In terms of
mucha
social
cooperación
policy,
externa
there
durante
was a
muchos
lot
años.
of outside cooperation for many years, and this cooperation made it so that the shock wasn't as strong for social policy.
Este gobierno
This
tiene la misma
government
política
has the same economic policy,
y en lugar de política
and
social, lo que tiene es una
instead
política
of
clientelar.
social policy, what it has is a clientele policy.
the social policies.
It's a certain type of social populism, we'll call it that. The big problem with populism is that it doesn't get to the root of the problem, right?
Sino que se limita
But
a repartir cosas,
it just limits itself to distribution of things.
repartir las
Distribution of metal sheets, or distribution of hens, or distribution of chickens.
Evidentemente,
Evidently,
toda la etapa
the,
desde los 90 hasta ahora,
the whole period from 1990s to now, the biggest impact has been the dismantling of social policy in the country.
And the deterioration of the social policies of the
es
country.
decir,
And Nicaragua continues
Continues
to have
la misma tasa de
the
educación
same
primaria
education rate, primary education rate,
de hace 10, 15 años.
that it had 10, 15 years ago. I mean, there isn't a consistent improvement in this situation, of this situation.
Sí,
Yeah,
la educación
and the
sigue
education
teniendo
continues to have serious weaknesses in the country. This is a country that needs to count on education, and right now education is weak.
Education in our country is
y
very
no ha variado.
It hasn't changed much in the last 20-some years.
I'd like to switch gears a bit and ask you to reflect a bit about feminism and to ask a few questions if it's had any relevance to your work, if at all.
Quiero cambiar ahorita y hablar un poco más sobre feminismo y si ha influido un poco en su trabajo en alguna manera.
But first, I'd like to ask how you understand or define feminism.
Pero primeramente para empezar, ¿cómo defines el término feminismo?
Mira, yo
Well,
creo que el
look,
feminismo
I
es un
think that
posicionamiento
feminism
frente a la vida.
is a way to confront life that tries
de
to
privilegiar
privilege
enfoques
approaches
que contribuyen a
that
lograr la equidad de
contribute
género.
to achieving gender equality.
Providing gender equality.
This is my perception of feminism.
Perception of feminism.
Ahora, hay
Now,
plataformas,
there are
plataformas
platforms and platforms of
de demanda feminista, y
feminist
además hay
demand,
pautas
and
de
there are even
comportamiento
guidelines for different behaviors. So then I feel like a feminist.
I feel like as though
I
No he
I have
militado
not
en el movimiento
been
feminista porque he
active
hecho
in
más
the
bien política.
feminist movement because I have been involved in
Una cosa más bien
political
de
issues.
naturaleza formal.
It's something that I've done formally,
Pero
but I think that, well,
bueno, es lo menos que
it's
podemos
the
hacer las
least
mujeres,
that,
¿verdad?
us women can do, right?
What has your experience been like as a woman involved in politics? Have you ever been treated differently?
¿Cómo ha sido tu experiencia siendo una mujer en las políticas? ¿Te han tratado diferente por ser mujer?
Sí,
Yes.
Have you experienced discrimination?
muy fina en mi caso.
Very
muy fina,
subtly.
pues, pero-
In my
pero
case, it's very subtle, but
siempre
well,
hay un modelo
there's
de
always a certain
subestimación,
way of
cierta-
underestimating. Like,
digamos, cierta actitud de discriminación
a
para la
certain
participación en
attitude of
general.
discrimination in general for the participation of women in political life.
Tal vez yo tenga menos.
It may
ahora,
be that I confront it less now, but obviously if you look at the National Assembly, you'll realize that we only have 12% of it are women, right? And that the percentage of women in parliament was proportionally higher in 1980 than what it is now. But you can also notice that it has improved much more in Latin America than it has in Nicaragua. So that the path for political life, the path of political life for women isn't easy in party politics in general in Nicaragua. In the SRM, there are a lot of women, I think, participating in politics. Now there are a lot of young women participating in politics. But it's not common in many of the departmental offices. I feel that there is a generation of very strong young leaders, but they're just now opening up space. In fact, within the SRM, there is now a network of women in the party to promote female candidates. But even in the network, we recognize that we have to do a special effort. But in the reality of Nicaragua, political participation of women in politics continues being very difficult.
You've had a very steady, undying commitment to social justice over the years. What are you most proud of?
Tenido un compromiso muy estable de la justicia social durante tu historia.
What are you most proud of?
¿De qué eres más orgullosa?
Like what?
Tú has mantenido como una lucha muy, bueno, siempre has luchado por la justicia social, pero en toda la vida de qué eres más orgullosa.
En mi vida.
In my life,
No sé,
I don't know.
tal vez.
Maybe.
No sé, en realidad.
I really don't know.
A ver,
Let's see.
te voy a decir.
I'm
lo que
going
me
to tell
da
you what brings me
tranquilidad, vamos a decirlo así.
peace of mind.
Tell you what gives me
I'll say it that way.
No censurarme.
Not censor myself.
Es decir, yo trato de
I
decir lo que
try
pienso
to say what I think
try to say what I
sobre lo que yo
about what
creo
I
que pasa en el
think
país.
happens in the country.
Y
Even
pago por eso.
though I pay for it.
Es decir, puedo pagar por eso.
That is to say, I can pay that price.
Entonces eso,
So then this,
porque a veces uno,
sometimes if one spoke less, one would have fewer problems.
pero
But
yo tengo
I
mucho aprecio
really
por mi
appreciate
libertad de
my
hablar lo que
freedom
yo
to say
creo.
what I believe.
to have the liberty for saying what I believe in.
Y yo peleo por ese
And I
espacio,
fight
¿no?
for that.
For that space.
I fight for that space.
Pero no sé de qué
But I don't know
sentirme orgullosa.
what to be
Bueno,
proud
me
of.
siento
Well,
orgullosa de mi
I feel
padre,
proud of my parents, for example.
Creo que era una
I
persona
think they were
extraordinaria.
extraordinary, both of them extraordinary people,
Persona sensible,
sensible people,
trabajadora,
hard workers,
inteligente,
intelligent,
Hard worker, very intelligent.
digamos, buenos padres.
good parents.
Eso,
This
me siento muy orgullosa de ellos.
I really feel proud of that. And I think that my brother and I were very lucky.
Had a lot of luck.
Otra gente no
Other
tiene tanta
people
suerte.
have not been so
Other
lucky.
people don't have that kind of luck.
Pero no sabría
But
qué
I
otra
wouldn't
cosa
know
sentirme orgulloso.
what else to feel proud of.
Pero no sé,
It really
yo
has
pensaba en
never occurred to me to think about it.
Never occurred to me to think about that.
It's really my honor to talk to you, and I know I could ask you questions for hours, but I want to be respectful of your time.
Realmente es un honor estar aquí hablando contigo y aunque me gustaría preguntarte muchas más cosas, no quiero respetar tu tiempo.
Muchas gracias.
Well, thank you.
Are there any other topics you'd like to talk about before we complete?
No sé.
I don't know. I can't think of anything.
Well, I want to thank you very much for your time today and for
No,
participating in this
thank you
project.
both.
Muchísimas gracias.
Muchas gracias a ustedes.
No, thank you both.